Alex Costello. Very much welcome to our summit. We met already several times in different conferences, and I know about your wide knowledge about many things. You are founder of Jim's Kinesiology College and creator of the Jim's courses. You also have been working in holistic health field for over 20 years with clients, with teaching various modalities of specialized kinesiology, muscle response testing, and you are on the boards of various national and international associations, and currently IKC faculty for Costa Rica. Very much welcome, dear Alexis.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be talking with you today.
Today we are going to talk about something that all women are usually interested because they go through many of these times in their lives. Premenopause and postmenopause. You work on this area for a long time, and you just said, whatever you ask about the hormones, here we are on the wave and sailing. Yes, so tell me what you find so interesting in this area.
Oh, what isn't interesting about this area? I mean, the first thing that I usually want to talk to women about is the idea that hormones are not the enemy. And this feels important because for so many of us, the idea that we are being hormonal has been kind of lobbed at us like a weapon since we were maybe 9 or 10 years old, right? And as girls, as women, we have to deal with such crazy changes and fluctuations with our hormones. For one of the courses that I wrote recently, which is working with archetypes and estrogen and energy and all of these different things, it was part of a female reproductive health masterclass. I was really looking at the way that our hormones fluctuate. And there was a chart. And when I saw this chart, I showed my daughter, and we talked about it for an entire afternoon because the chart was showing the way that the typical hormones fluctuate in a normal 28-day menstrual cycle. We're all familiar with a chart like this. We've seen it before, right? Where the hormones start down here and you see the follicle stimulating hormone come up, you see the luteinizing hormone come up, the estrogen come up, then the estrogen comes down, the progesterone goes up, right? And we see that fluctuation. The thing that was different about this chart that filled me with rage was that this chart included one other little thing at the bottom. And what it included was the fluctuation of male hormones in the same amount of time. And all what you see on the bottom is it's just a straight line. It goes across. And that's not to say that male hormones don't fluctuate. We know that testosterone has a cyclical nature to it. It has a circadian rhythm. We know that testosterone starts to decrease at a certain age for men, but they're not on this roller coaster that we are doing every month. And then for so many years, allopathic medicine and even natural medicine had been really dominated by masculine practitioners who are then looking at women and their complaints and going, well, you're just being hormonal, as if that is a simple answer for the things that are happening. And it's not. It's not a simple answer, right? It's true, we are being hormonal, but we can't not be. And we can't not be because when we look at something like estrogen, for instance, and empowered estrogen was the title I gave to this presentation because it's so maligned for us. But when we look at estrogen, like it's not just a sex hormone. People think of estrogen as a sex hormone, but it's actually a determiner of epigenetic effects in the body. There are something like 50 different genes that are activated by estrogen, right? And there are hundreds of different processes that are activated by estrogen in the body. And so when your estrogen levels start decreasing, when we start talking about perimenopause, this is having an effect. It's not just, oh, this is having an effect on my sex drive or having an effect on hot flashes. Those things are bad enough. I shouldn't say it's not just because those things are huge, but it's also these hundreds of other processes in my body, in my brain, in my thoughts that are changing as a response to this chemical imbalance that's happening in my body. And that's huge and should not be underestimated.
Yeah, very, very true. So understanding of women body, it's something completely different than men's body, especially because we are very much connected also with all these emotions that are connected with hormones, and usually is also in a negative way. You have PMS, premenstrual syndrome. I usually, when somebody says this to me, I usually say if this is a guy, do you know that you also have PMS? And we go, how? Yes, pectoralis major sternalis. This is a muscle of your breasts. So we start to laugh, it's exactly what you said. It's just to know how to balance this, not balance, but go through balancing this um, fluctuation of hormones and at the same time the emotions. Do you practice any emotional healing or incorporate some emotions also in your work?
Oh, of course. So, I mean, one of the major advantages of working with energy kinesiology, muscle response testing, is that this allows us to look at what's going on for the individual, right? So I'm making some blanket statements about hormones and that sort of thing. And it's important that we have that knowledge when we're working with people on our table. But the ability to also go in and go, well, what are your specific stresses that we're looking at right now? Now, if you look at, the typical symptoms of perimenopause, menopause, anxiety and depression show up on a lot of the lists, right? And they show up on a lot of the lists because hormones like estrogen and progesterone actually have a big role in how we receive sensory information and how we process emotional data in our body. And so if you think about that sort of stereotype, yeah, think of the stereotype from a movie of the pregnant woman that is just like sobbing uncontrollably, right? Who's just like crying at commercials and things like that. Uh, if you've been pregnant, many of us have, you know that that's not really that much of an exaggeration, right? I remember when I was pregnant with my youngest, and I remember having a conversation with my husband once that was fine. It wasn't a fight. There's nothing wrong. But we were talking and I started to sob, and I remember having to stop and reassure him, like, I'm fine. Uh, Nothing's wrong. I just can't stop crying, right? And why is that happening in pregnancy? In pregnancy, it's happening because of the huge amounts of progesterone as well as other hormones that are kind of flooding the body system. But there's a very similar thing happening when we are in perimenopause, in that the ratios between estrogen and progesterone and testosterone, which have been relatively set for a certain number of years, have started to go wonky again, right? And so it's the same kind of craziness that we're experiencing in adolescence, except that we're experiencing it now when the stakes are higher. And that's another one of the reasons why we have to be able to work with the emotion and with stress. Because when you're 12 or 13 and your hormones are doing this and you're super erratic, it's okay. People expect that of you. You're 13. You don't know what's going on. And also, what's the worst that can happen? You say something embarrassing, or you get a bad grade on a test or something like that. Whatever. It's fine. But when we're in our 40s and your hormones are going like this, we're in a really powerful stage in our lives. We have a lot of us have kids and we have long-term relationships and we run companies and we have people who depend on us. And so if we're unstable, that can really change the landscape of your relationships, right? And can really change what's happening for you. So the stakes are higher. And so we have to be able to work with it in a different way. So, I mean, when I'm working with women, yeah, we're definitely doing a lot of what I would think of as emotional and energetic corrections while they're on the table to help bring those things into more stability. But I'm also often teaching people really basic kind of touch for health style corrections, like something as simple as, holding your hand over these points at the front and on the back. And without going into why exactly this works for everybody who doesn't have a muscle testing background that's watching this, um, instinctively, when we get really stressed out, we will often kind of rest our hand here, right? This is a very typical kind of pose for, oh, I feel super overwhelmed and stressed right now. And what we are doing is bringing more blood flow to the frontal cortex, which is allowing us to think things through in a different way and bringing it away from the hindbrain where we go into more reflexive stereotyped actions. And so that can give us this moment of pause and processing and the allowance for logic as well as creativity and problem solving. And that little tiny pause, that little tiny bit, can be enough to keep us from feeling too overwhelmed or from flying off the handle or something like that. But I think this is also one of the major ways where we need to be looking at hormones globally. So when I'm working with women, I'm not just focusing on those sex hormones of estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, but we're also looking at the endocrine system in its entirety. And when we bring that more into alignment, we also see a lot more stability when we're looking at emotions.
Do you find any connection between all these hormones? You mentioned actually anxiety, and I think you mentioned also fear. So do you connect some of emotional disbalance with certain state? When I went, for example, through premenopause and menopause, I was faced with a lot of fear, a lot. That was, it was like with a truck. You could took them on several trucks and took it away. Do you find a connection also with other emotions?
Well, I think in order to answer that, one of the things that we should talk about is the way that estrogen and those hormones are linked to the adrenal glands. Because honestly, the adrenal glands are usually one of the first things that I need to work on with women when they come in with issues around perimenopause, menopause, that sort of thing. Um, and there are really important biochemical reasons why that is the case. So a lot of people, well, let's just talk about another hormone for a second, which is cortisol. Cortisol has a bad rep right now, right? Like everyone talks about cortisol belly, like cortisol is making me fat, or cortisol face, like it's making me swollen. Um, People talk about cortisol reducing diets and that sort of thing. And I see a lot of this in my social media feeds and that sort of thing. And so I think people have gotten the idea not only are our feminine hormones being vilified, but there's this idea that cortisol is also bad, right? And as you know, as other practitioners in the health field know, cortisol's not bad. Cortisol's like it is a stress hormone, but it's not a stress hormone. Cortisol is meant to be a counterpart to like adrenaline and epinephrine, right? And so its job is actually to keep our other stress hormones more in balance. It's designed to help us return to a parasympathetic nervous system state. It's designed to help us have the energy to deal with what's happening in the world around us, right? So, yeah, when we go into a fight flight state, cortisol does go up, but it's not a bad thing. We need it to go up. And cortisol does all kinds of great things for our body. It helps to keep our blood pressure and our blood sugar under control.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
your cortisol levels are naturally high in the morning. They're high in the morning so you can get out of bed. If you have true adrenal fatigue and your adrenals have actually crashed, it's very difficult to get out of bed and you feel very faint when you stand up because you don't get that little spike that gives you that energy to kind of get up and go. Cortisol is also anti-inflammatory and helps suppress the immune system, which sounds like a bad thing, but when this is in balance, what this does is it helps to keep autoimmune conditions kind of under wraps. So cortisol does all these awesome things. So we're not saying cortisol is bad. However, when we are in long-term stress kind of states, one of the things that happens is our body might have to produce lots and lots of cortisol, like more than would be good for us. And we might have been doing that fine when we were younger, but we need to then think about what's happening as we get older, where our estrogen is concerned. So your body makes estrogen in a few different places, right? It makes estrogen in your ovaries. That's where most of us are familiar with. And so, like, yeah, as I get older, I have fewer eggs, I have less estrogen, I don't have as much coming from there. And so then my other manufacturers of
Source, yeah.
estrogen, yeah, they start to become more important. So one is adipose tissue. So we have estrogen in our fat, and our fat can make estrogen. And we also have it in our adrenals. And your adrenals make androgens. So they make DHEA, which can be converted into testosterone or estrogen as needed. And they also make a certain amount of progesterone. And there's a whole very complicated conjugation pathway that is happening that allows for that. But the important thing for us to know right now is that progesterone gets converted into cortisol if needed. So one of the things that's happening when we are in those high cortisol states, it's not just that our stress hormones are going up, it's also that your progesterone ends up going down because your body ends up using it to make that cortisol. And then that throws your estrogen and progesterone balance really out of whack. So that's when people start talking about estrogen dominance, and people will go, well, how can you have estrogen dominance when you're in perimenopause? How can it be that you don't have estrogen and have estrogen dominance? I don't understand. But a lot of it is about this ratio and what's happening at the level of the adrenals. So I mention that because that's when we start to really see anxiety, depression, the brain fog, the fatigue, all of those things that people start to complain about. Is that because we don't have enough estrogen? Yeah, like those are symptoms of depleted estrogens in the body. They're also symptoms of adrenal tiredness. I don't want to even say adrenal fatigue because I feel like it gets overused. And I said tiredness, which is the same thing, but it's like the adrenals are not in balance and they're not being taken care of well. And therefore, we need to kind of start there, I think, for a lot of people. Um, and then what we see is that those emotions that you're describing start to come more into alignment because we're not going into that crazy fight flight kind of mode all the time. And then our body is able to properly manufacture our estrogen, testosterone, progesterone better and in better ratios. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes, very much sense. Yeah. For me, everything in the body is interconnected. So we cannot say this is bad and this is good, or this is too much and this is too little. Yes, might be in the sense of tests, this medical tests, but more important is to ask why actually this happened. Why is reason? And I also know from my studies of kinesiology how we tap with this like talking with muscles into subconscious. How you get all this information from your clients?
Do you mean how does the muscle testing work,
No,
or?
no, I mean how, yes, how you get information about the hormones and uh, emotions, how this combine. You probably use this muscle testing. It's not muscle testing. You also used this another word. How it is used? It's not muscle response feedback. Yeah, now I remembered. Yeah.
Yeah.
Only through this, or you have also some other approaches. How you get more in depth what is going on inside the person.
Right. I feel like muscle testing, muscle testing itself is a biofeedback mechanism, right? It's allowing us to make information that the body has on a subconscious or a superconscious level conscious. And so what we're seeing is the way that the body is responding to a word, a question, a point, whatever it is, right? So, I mean, I have my own system for how to move through different kinds of stressors to see where the imbalance actually lies in the body. You mentioned at the beginning when you were introducing me, like the GEMS classes work a lot with five element theory, as well as working with various just basic hand modes to kind of figure out from the general to the specific, what is it that the stress actually is in the body. And I also work a lot with SIPS. So SIPS as a modality works with finding frequencies in the body of stress. And the whole thing, both GEMS and SIPS as modalities are really geared around this idea of we don't really care what the diagnosis is, which is kind of what you were
Yeah,
saying before. It's like when people come in and they want to tell me all of their diagnosis, that doesn't really matter. What matters to me is where is the stress in the body that has allowed this situation
exactly.
to exist? And so what are we talking about here? And so muscle testing itself is basically a process of elimination, the way that we are doing it in these modalities, where every time I'm getting an indicated change, I'm going, okay, we're looking at something. I know that if we're looking at something on a biochemical level in the body, that tells me something. So I'm not looking to see what's happening with the muscle right now. I'm looking into the hormones, right? And then I can narrow it down, specific glands, specific hormones. I can use the points to put those frequencies into the circuit. The the trick with muscle testing that a lot of people don't understand if they're not in the industry. So because this is going out to people that maybe have never had experience with muscle testing or even been muscle tested, you can only test what you know to test. So the more your practitioner understands about physiology, the more they understand about the way the energy systems work in the body, the more they understand about how those glands interact and how those hormones are actually made and metabolized and detoxified and acylated and all of those things. The more of those things your practitioner understands, the more we know what to ask and what it means when it comes up as a stress point. And therefore, we can put it together in a much more specific way. If you don't know what to ask, then you can get stuck. So when you're saying, how do we move through it? It's a combination of a very simple tool of muscle testing, which anyone can learn, everyone can muscle test. And then we're combining that with actual in-depth knowledge of the systems and experience, right? And you know as well as I do that if you've been working with these techniques and with, you know, just working with people for that many years, you do start to get a sense of, oh, I know that typically if there is stress here, we might also see stress here and here and here. So I don't have to challenge everything else in the body. I can start by looking here and seeing if this is the issue. And your body might surprise me because it is unique and it is possible that it's connected to something else entirely. But there are patterns that we tend to see, right? So we learn the patterns.
Yeah, this is also all this knowledge about hormones, what is connected. You gave really, really in depth, uh, talk about this for people to think how everything is interconnected and how important is actually to have this knowledge, what is interconnected, that that we know where to search where something started. In your opinion, where usually starts something, or is this very much dependent on people, or there is a pattern present among more women?
Ooh, that's such a good question.
For
Um,
I will give an example. I'm working mostly with people who have cancer, because I myself I was diagnosed with a cancer, and I overgrew. I'm cured of cancer, and it was exactly what you said, hormonal dependent one. So my estrogen was, my God, in the sky. And my progesterone was somewhere in the bottom. So huge difference. And I just couldn't manage these waves of both hormones. And I figured out that most people have emotional origin of everything, what is happening to them. And mostly with cancer, mostly, not always, but mostly, there is guilt behind. So whenever I have somebody that has cancer, and especially if it is hormonal dependent, then some emotions are behind. What pattern you perceive in your practice, if any?
I'm in the same situation as you in that I'm working with a lot of people with cancer right now and a lot of women with hormonal based cancers. So we're seeing a lot of breast, endometrial, cervical, right? Um, and so there's a couple different components to that. There is the hormonal component that we were talking about before. There is also definitely an emotional component. And when we start talking about emotions and um, the energetic physiology of the areas, it's important for us to remember, like when we're talking about estrogen-based cancers, people talk about genetic tendencies a lot, right? Like, oh, there's certain genes that we know now are linked to higher chance of breast cancer. And yet, we have to kind of look at the epigenetic aspect of this because if it was pre-programmed into your genes that you were going to express it in this way, then it would make sense that that would begin being expressed at 11 or 12 years old when a girl began developing breast tissue, right? It doesn't make sense that that gene is repressed until she's 35 or 40 or 45 or however, right? And then suddenly that gene's expressed. Like that's very strange if you actually think about it. So why is that gene suddenly being expressed? And usually the reason why is emotional or it's energetic, it's stress, because the body doesn't start going, oh, we're just going to start making this toxic thing. If the body's turning on a gene, it's because it thinks that it needs it right now. So why does the body think it needs it right now, right? Your body's doing it for a reason. It's doing it because it thinks that that's the solution at this moment in time. So that's why we need to look at what are the emotions and things underneath it. And for so many women, there is guilt, as you mentioned, especially in our role as mothers. I mean, the role of the mother has been set up in such a way that we can't win, right? Like you you simply can't win at mothering. It's just programmed that way. And when I see women who, like a lot of the women that I see with breast cancer, especially, and I don't know why those are the two that are correlated, but it is. Um, they ended up in sort of a martyr situation often with their children, as in they spent all of these years giving and giving and giving and giving for their partner, for their children. And sometimes it's not for that. Sometimes it's for their parents or for their company or whatever. But it's like they keep giving out of themselves until they get to a spot where there is nothing else left. And uh, I was at a congress earlier in the year that was around trauma. And I was speaking specifically on the way that the thymus and the thyroid respond to trauma. And it is an absolute known medical fact that women have more autoimmune issues than men do.
Yes, it's
And
true.
and why do we have all these autoimmune issues? Well, there's all kinds of interesting energetic physiology things around the suppression, around not being able to address your own needs, around things that shouldn't be toxic becoming toxic to you. Um, there's all kinds of interesting stuff there. And so when I am working with women, we are definitely finding these areas of emotional stress, finding areas of shock trauma. When we're talking about things with the cervix and the endometrial layer and such, we can also often be correlating that with the energetic systems of like the sacral chakra, which is a yin powerhouse in the body. But again, if that energy has become distorted in some way, then, and when I say distorted, and maybe that sounds like I'm making a judgment on somebody, but for so many women, there has been sexual trauma, right, of some degree. And even if we're just talking about the trauma of carrying a baby and not having that go exactly the way we wanted it to, like all of those things are trauma in that system. And they impact the way that that energy actually works in that space, right? And when we have scar tissue and trauma and those kinds of things in the uterus, in the epithelial, and in the endometrial layers, yeah, that can express as cancers and things later on, right? Or it can express as normal hormonal imbalance as we're going into like menopause.
Yeah.
Um, and just to take it to one other spot for a second here, because we were talking about the emotional component, but in traditional Chinese medicine, there's also a huge correlation with the liver and the way that our body metabolizes those hormones. And I say in TCM because typically, if we were looking at how to like treat perimenopause or menopause from a TCM standpoint, we would end up talking about strengthening liver and kidneys, right? And getting rid of stagnation and all of that. And that's a concept that has existed in TCM for thousands of years. And now, in more recent times, we have an understanding. Oh, yeah, one of the things that your liver does on like a biochemical level is get rid of excess estrogens in the body. And so if the liver is not functioning properly, it really does hold estrogen, which then can again throw those levels really out of balance, especially in the world that we're in now, where we have all these xenoestrogens from the plastics and things that we are being exposed to. So we can also see how, first of all, more modern medical science is validating the experience from thousands of years ago of looking at things on an energetic level. But then we also end up looking at what does the liver do and symbolize in TCM and emotionally, because you were bringing up the emotion with it, right? And the liver tends to be associated with anger. And one of the things I'm seeing all of these sort of jokey things about perimenopause now because I've been ranting about it on social media for the last few months. And so now the algorithm is like, you obviously want to see other women who are angry about perimenopause. Here you go. Um, so one of the symptoms that we hear a lot from women is this sort of hot, fiery anger flaring up. And people will tell me, oh, it's out of nowhere. I never used to be angry. And suddenly I'm just so angry all the time. And I find myself often with these women going, is it true that you never used to be angry? Or is it that you've never been allowed to be angry? Because for so many of us, we've never been allowed to be angry. It wasn't safe, right? Or it was
Just for
discouraged.
men. This is anger is just for men.
Anger's just for men.
Yeah.
Women, we're allowed to cry. We're allowed to be upset about things, but we're not allowed to be angry about things. Men are allowed to be angry about things, but they're not supposed to cry. That's unrealistic,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So often women have been stuffing that anger into their tissues. You know, our uterus is a nice little pocket. So we've been stuffing anger in there for the last however many decades. And suddenly it's starting to kind of come out. And again, it can come out in the form of autoimmune issues. It can come out in the form of blowing up with the people around us. It can be turned inward, which then looks more like depression, right? It can turn toxic. So, yeah, just being able to kind of look at these root causes from all these different angles, looking at the root cause from the biochemistry level, but also from the energetic physiology, the esoteric, right? The emotional. And how do we put this together? Because you are a complex being and all of these things matter when we are looking at what's going on for you right now.
Yeah. You delivered now really pure wisdom. So I'm so grateful, that you explained this from different angles and and gave opportunity for our audience to understand where is the origin of something that is imbalanced in regard to hormones, and that hormones are just an expression what is going on inside. So beautiful, so beautiful. I hope that all participants of this summit have really good insight in their health, and not just health, of course, health in many ways, on physical level, on emotional, mental, energy level, and spiritual level, all 5 levels. So great. Have you experienced, are you experiencing, we talked that you are entering this premenopause. Do you experience some of this changes in yourself?
I definitely started noticing some of those changes in the last couple years. And it seems like such a cruel joke. I hit 40, and I don't know about you, but this has been the experience of some other women I've talked to. I hit 40 and suddenly I felt better in myself than I ever had. Like, I feel I don't care so much what anybody thinks, right? And I feel like I have the confidence and the experience and the power to stay in my own integrity. And I feel like I'm in really good shape physically in so many ways and emotionally. I'm in better shape than I was ever in my early 20s and that sort of thing. And I had just sort of stepped into this space of like, yeah, all right, here we go. And then suddenly my hormones started being awful. And I was like, wait, what? What? Like, that doesn't seem fair. Um, So what I was noticing first, I was starting to get a little bit of the night sweats. And what I'm also noticing is that terrible thing where my cycles are getting shorter and the bleeding is getting longer. That's really typical for a lot of women when they're first sort of starting to do that. Um, I actually skipped a period, which caused me to have to take a pregnancy test, which was terrifying because there is nothing I want less than to have another baby at this point. Um, but that was a clue for me, like, oh, okay, we're starting to see some irregularity in a cycle that has been very regular for how many years, right? And what was interesting to me, because I do a lot of this muscle testing work and such on myself, so starting to notice, yeah, the cycle change, a little bit of the night sweats, difficulty with focus and concentration, which for me is a huge one because I make a living by being able to focus and concentrate and to be able to work on my clients and to be able to convey things clearly when I'm teaching. So if my brain isn't working, we are done, right? So when I started working on myself, what was um, enlightening in the first moment was that the first things that were coming up for me were not what we would think of as estrogen balancing kind of supplements or something, right? It wasn't, oh, I need to take black cohosh or I need to get more flavonoids into my diet or something like that. It was to take an adrenal supplement. And that was when I started really researching the correlations between the way that the adrenals make those hormones and the way that the reproductive system is functioning, because I knew that they were correlated before that, but I didn't really understand the chemistry of it all until I needed to look it up and understand it better. Um, for myself, but also because a lot of my friends, a lot of my clients were all kind of hitting this at the same time, right? So suddenly it's everyone in my circle is in the same boat. So it's being able to help them too. Um, so people have been asking me a little bit, what am I doing for this in my own body? And I think one of the most important things I do is I take adrenal support. Um, and so what that can look like for people are adaptogenic herbs, and adaptogenic herbs are adrenal balancing.
Can you
So
name some?
yeah, so some
Some
examples would
typical, few
be,
typical.
yeah, like holy basil would be an example, ashwagandha, Siberian ginseng. These are things that are meant to balance adrenals, and the other would be B vitamins, which also help to balance the adrenals. And so, for any herbs, of course, here's my backside covering statement, but make sure that they don't contraindicate with other medications you're taking or anything of that sort. But in general, adrenal supporting herbs are really helpful. And the other one that's really helpful for a lot of women right off the bat is magnesium. And the reason why magnesium is because what's one of the major complaints we hear about with women that are going through hormonal changes is they stop sleeping, right? And magnesium in our muscles is a muscle relaxant. It's a relaxant for our nervous system. Um, it really does help everything to kind of balance out. And magnesium deficiency is really common with the way that a lot of our diets are. And so bringing in a magnesium supplement in the evening can be really helpful. And there's not really a downside. Like magnesium isn't one of those things where there's lots of contraindications or lots of side effects. If you take too much magnesium, you might get a loose stool. And that's a sign usually that you're taking too much. But in general, it's going to be really positive for helping you to bring some stability to your body, helping you sleep, helping your nervous system regulate, helping your adrenals calm down, right? And those are things that are really easy. And most people in general, I shouldn't even say most women, most people will notice a difference when we're talking about like adaptogenic adrenal support and magnesium. You notice it right away. They aren't usually things that take a long time to kind of build up and change in your body. And so within a couple weeks, you're going to know whether you're on the right track So you're not wasting a lot of time or money buying a lot of supplements that aren't working for you. And of course, if you have the advantage of working with somebody who does muscle testing, or you can muscle test on your own, then you can make sure that you're taking the right supplement in the first place, which is also really helpful. So I'm not here to sell supplements. That's not my thing.
No, this is
But people,
supplements just help. It's,
exactly.
yeah, help to overcome this phase that all the hormones start to function on different balance.
Exactly. You're helping your body with a transition. And we
Exactly.
sometimes need a little extra energy, extra support as we move through those phases of transition.
Yes, exactly. What about foods, for example? What foods would you recommend especially for menopause and premenopause?
Right. So, you may have heard the term phytoestrogen before. Phytoestrogen means plant estrogens. And so it's not exactly the same chemically. Like a phytoestrogen isn't exactly the same as your own estrogen, but these are chemically close, and your body can use them to kind of help create more balance and stability in your own hormones. And so when we talk about phytoestrogens, a few good examples of that are lignans. So lignans we find in things like flax seeds or sesame seeds, right? And they are very helpful as sources of soluble and insoluble fiber. They're going to help your body to metabolize excess estrogens. They're going to help you to move everything through your digestive system better, but they're also going to support hormone balance. Um, Another example are just flavonoids in general. And we get flavonoids from anything that you've ever heard as being a high antioxidant food is high flavonoid, right? So when we talk about eating berries, when we talk about eating dark green leafy vegetables, those things are all high in flavonoids. And those nutrients really support, again, like our estrogen, but also our liver, right? And one specific flavonoid that I think women especially should be aware of is called indole 3 carbinol. And this is, you don't have to remember that name, but what you do need to remember is that this is found in cruciferous vegetables. So we find this in broccoli, kale, Brussels sprouts, those sorts of things. And this component has very much been correlated with being able to, again, get rid of those excess estrogens, help bring balance to your hormones. It is known as a fighter for cancers and especially hormone-based cancers. Um, so whatever your personal feelings about Brussels sprouts or kale or whatever are, there is some pretty good research to suggest that bringing those things into your diet, doesn't have to be every day, but like as much as you can, bringing those things into your diet really helps your body to metabolize those hormones differently. And that's a really easy way of doing it, right? If you cannot stomach those things, you can also get that as a supplement, but you have to eat. So why not eat the foods that are going to help support your body really well? Um, yeah, those are some basic ones. There's other ones that you see on lists of phytoestrogens, like for instance, um, soy isoflavones, which can be a little more controversial
Yes.
because there can be
Some,
downsides.
yeah,
Yeah.
some people cannot digest this everything from soya.
Mhm. Exactly. I was speaking about this with a friend the other day because when I was like 18 and 19 years old, I was working in a health food store and I was also doing demos for a company that made soy protein powders that were being marketed to women. And so and I was a vegetarian at the time. So I was drinking like a couple of these soy protein shakes every day because we were being marketed this idea that this is, you're a vegetarian, you got to get your protein. And for women, this is going to help with your PMS and it's going to help with your chances of breast cancer and it's going to help with all of these things. And I think there was a period of time when, if I think about it, I was probably drinking two protein shakes a day and then often eating tofu or something for dinner. because I was going to the gym, right? And that's what you're supposed to do. And I don't feel like that was good for my thyroid. Now
Mm,
that I
mm.
know what I know. But that is how it was being marketed at that point in time, right? And then later, when companies started to realize, oh, wait a minute, some of these forms of soy can have problems, can create problems with the thyroid over time. They can be hard to digest. They might actually create imbalances with estrogen. I think if you're going to look at soy isoflavones, we want to look at them the way that they are more traditionally consumed in Asian cultures. We want to look at things that are fermented. And when you're
Yeah,
looking at
yeah, that's it.
fermented, exactly, when you're looking at something like tempeh, that is so different in the way that that supports your microbiome, the way that that supports your hormones. It's a totally different thing than when we're looking at like a soy isolate as a protein. So yeah, being really aware of what your body likes, what your body can metabolize, and always, again, taking the research with a grain of salt and looking to see who's putting out those studies in the
Yeah,
first place
this
as
is
well.
this is so important. One of my clients got anemia from soya products because soya prevents absorption of iron, and was everything was wrong. Then we started, and I said, no, no soy anymore. She was also vegetarian, and with vegetarian person needs to be really very careful what put inside, because with weak digestive system, my God, you can cause so many problems.
Yeah.
So be very careful. Um, Alexis, for the conclusion, do you have something that you would like to put as a cherry on the top? Because you delivered really gems, uh, GEMs. You are actually true representative of your own faculty.
That's very, very sweet. Thank you. I think the real thing here is that this should be an empowering time for us as women. When I look at archetypes and things, when we are moving into our perimenopause stage, we're moving into our queen archetype. We're moving into a place of power and confidence. And we want to be able to do that, right? And so the way that we're going to do that is really by supporting our hormones, by supporting our adrenals, by making sure our liver is in good shape to help detoxify everything. And that's going to allow us to bring this energy and power into the second half of our lives so that we can really fully express ourselves and be exactly who we want to be. So that's what I want for myself. It's what I want for my friends right now. It's what I want for my clients. And so if anything from this helps you find that spark, then I'm really glad to be here.
I'm sure our audience found very good information for their good life. And thank you very much for being willing to uh, be a speaker in the summit and to really spread this knowledge to all people that are interested in natural healing. This is very, very important what I see nowadays, that we build this awareness, how Mother Nature, how energies, how we ourselves can heal ourselves. So thank you very much.
Thank you.